Welcome to Curious Media. If you're watching this video, you're probably interested in learning more about the often scary lives of Native Americans. Have you ever heard the story of Mary Campbell, the 10-year-old girl who was kidnapped by Delaware Indians and absorbed into their community for 6 years? Or about the Gnadenhutten Massacre, in which militiamen from Pennsylvania brutally murdered 96 Christianized Delaware Indians? These are just a few examples of the many conflicts and injustices that Native Americans have faced throughout history. In this video, we'll delve into some of the most significant events in Native American history and explore the complex and often tragic relationship between indigenous peoples and European settlers in the United States. So sit back and get ready to learn about the scary lives of Native Americans with Curious Media, Mary Campbell's kidnapping, and the cautionary tale of white captives. So, Mary was just a 10-year-old girl living in rural Pennsylvania in 1758. One day, she cared for her neighbor's children when Delaware Indians suddenly kidnapped her. She ended up living with them for the next 6 years, which was not uncommon at the time. There were actually around 200 known cases of white captives being absorbed into Native American communities. These individuals often became pawns in the ongoing power struggle between European powers, American colonists, and indigenous peoples who were trying to maintain their populations, land, and way of life. Now, Mary was eventually returned to her white family, and there's even some evidence that she lived happily with her adopted tribe. However, stories like hers became cautionary tales for white settlers, who became increasingly paranoid and fearful of savage Native Americans. From the moment Europeans set foot on American soil, frontier, the border between white civilization and the natural world became a place of conflict and cultural clashes. This eventually led the U.S. government to authorize over 1,500 wars, attacks, and raids on Native Americans, more than any other country has ever waged against its indigenous population. So why did this happen? Well, there were many factors at play. For one, many settlers had been denied the opportunity to inherit property in Europe, so they came to America eager to claim Indian land and the resources that came with it. Additionally, Native Americans' alliance with the British during the American Revolution and the War of 1812 only further fueled American hostility towards them. But perhaps most significantly, Native Americans were seen as fundamentally different. Their skin was dark, their languages were foreign, and their spiritual beliefs were often incomprehensible to white settlers. All of this contributed to a deep-seated fear and mistrust of indigenous people, which made it easy to portray them as pagan savages who needed to be eradicated in the name of Christianity and civilization. The Gnadenhutten Massacre. One particularly brutal example of this was the Gnadenhutten Massacre of 1782. A group of militiamen from Pennsylvania murdered 96 Christianized Delaware Indians, which really shows the growing contempt for Native Americans at the time. The Delawares, who have been blamed for attacks on white settlements, were ordered by Captain David Williamson to go to the cooper shop 2 at a time, where they were then bludgeoned to death with wooden mallets and hatchets. It's ironic, though, because the Delawares were actually the first Native Americans to capture a white settler, and they were also the first to sign a U.S. Indian treaty 4 years earlier. This treaty set a precedent for 374 similar agreements over the next 100 years, many of which resulted in tribal lands being ceded to the U.S. and established trade relations between the U.S. and Native Americans. The Trail of Tears. One of the most devastating events in Native American history was the Trail of Tears, which occurred in the late 1830s. The U.S. government, under the Indian Removal Act, forced around 16,000 Cherokee Indians to leave their ancestral lands in Georgia and Alabama and march to present-day Oklahoma. The journey was grueling, and around 4,000 Cherokee died due to starvation, disease, and exposure to the elements. This mass relocation of Native Americans, known as the Trail of Tears, was carried out by the U.S. government in an effort to clear the way for white settlers and access to valuable land and resources. The Wounded Knee Massacre. Another tragic event was the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890, which occurred on a Pine Ridge Indian reservation in South Dakota. U.S. soldiers opened fire on a group of Lakota Sioux who were practicing the ghost dance, a religious ceremony that they believed would bring their ancestors back and restore their way of life. The soldiers killed around 150 Lakota, many of whom were unarmed women and children, and wounded dozens more. The Wounded Knee Massacre marked the end of the Indian Wars, and it remains one of the darkest moments in Native American history. Despite the many challenges and injustices that Native Americans have faced, they have also shown tremendous resilience and determination. Despite being subjected to forced relocation, cultural assimilation, and attempted genocide, Native American communities have managed to survive and maintain their cultural traditions. Many Native Americans have also made significant contributions to American society, including serving in the military, participating in the civil rights movement, and advocating for Indigenous rights. As we conclude this video, we encourage you to continue learning about Native American history and culture. Take some time to research and learn about the different tribes and their unique traditions and ways of life. Consider supporting Native American organizations and causes, and be an advocate for Indigenous rights. As you reflect on the history of Native Americans, we leave you with some thought-provoking questions to consider. How can we work towards a more just and equitable society for Native Americans? How can we learn from the past and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past? And how can we show respect and appreciation for the rich culture and traditions of Indigenous peoples? Thanks for watching, and we hope you'll join us again for more curious content from Curious Media.